when three hikers stumbled across weathered bones near Blood Mountain in Georgia's Chattahoochee National Forest in the summer of 2015. They had no idea they'd just discovered the answer to a cold case from 1991. The victim was Daryl, a 29-year-old auto shop owner who vanished on a spring morning 24 years earlier. What investigators uncovered about his final hours, and who had been living among his grieving family all this time, shocked this tight-knit mountain community to its core. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. On a humid Tuesday morning in early June 2015, three college students from Atlanta decided to tackle a section of the Appalachian Trail cutting through North Georgia. Marcus, his girlfriend Ashley, and their friend Tyler had camped near Neal's Gap before setting out at dawn. Around mid-morning, they veered off the main trail to explore a creek bed where waterfalls cascade down the mountain. Ashley was first to notice something wedged between two boulders. "Hey, what's that?" she called out, pointing toward fabric buried under leaves. Marcus climbed closer, brushing away forest litter. His hand froze. Beneath the rotted fabric, bones were visible. Human bones. The skull stared back with empty eye sockets. Tyler pulled out his cell phone, but there was no signal this deep in the forest. They marked the location and hiked back quickly. An hour later, from the parking area, Marcus called 911. The Chattahoochee County Sheriff's Department dispatched two deputies immediately. By early afternoon, Detective James Michaels from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation arrived to oversee what was clearly a cold case investigation. The remains were too old, too deliberately concealed. Michaels crouched beside the skeletal remains as the forensic team documented everything. The bones showed signs of decades of exposure. Most telling was the skull, which showed a depressed fracture on the left side, consistent with blunt force trauma. "This wasn't an accident," Michaels said. "Someone died here, and someone wanted them to stay hidden." That evening, back at the sheriff's office in Somerville, Michaels sat surrounded by file boxes. Missing person cases from the early 90s were stored in paper format. He worked through them systematically. 3 hours in, he opened a file dated April 18, 1991. The photograph showed a young man with dark hair beside a Chevrolet pickup. The name read, Daryl Eugene Hutchins, age 29, last seen April 16, 1991. The report detailed how Daryl, owner of Hutchins Auto Repair on Highway 27, had left home early that Tuesday morning and never returned. His truck was found 3 days later on an abandoned logging road 12 miles north of town. This cold case had gone unsolved for decades. Michaels called the GBI lab. "I need priority on that skeleton. Pull dental records for Daryl Hutchins from Somerville." If this was Daryl, then this missing person case had just become a homicide investigation, and whoever killed him had been walking free for nearly a quarter century, possibly right here in Chattahoochee County. But what evidence remained after 2 decades of Georgia weather? And would it be enough to bring a killer to justice? To understand what happened in that forest in 1991, Detective Michaels needed to go back to the beginning. Daryl Hutchins had built his auto repair shop from nothing. After serving in the Army during the early 80s, he'd returned to Somerville with mechanical skills that impressed everyone. By 1988, he'd saved enough to lease a building on Highway 27. Hutchins Auto Repair opened with 1 lift and a sign Daryl painted himself. Within 3 years, the business had grown. Daryl hired 2 mechanics and earned a reputation for honest work. He was the kind of man who'd stay late to finish a job, who'd let someone pay next week if money was tight. At home, Daryl had married his high school sweetheart Brenda in 1985. They lived in a modest ranch house on 10 acres outside Somerville. On Monday, April 15, 1991, Daryl worked a full day at the shop. His mechanic, Seth, later told investigators that Daryl seemed normal. They'd worked on a Ford transmission together. Daryl mentioned he had an errand to run Tuesday morning before opening the shop, but didn't elaborate. Tuesday, April 16th, dawned clear and cool. Daryl's alarm went off at 5:30. Brenda heard him getting dressed, making coffee. She dozed back to sleep. When she woke around 7, Daryl was gone. His coffee cup sat in the sink, still warm. At Hutchins Auto Repair, Seth and the other mechanic arrived at 8 to find the shop locked. Daryl's truck wasn't in the lot. By 10, Seth called Daryl's house. Brenda answered, confused. She thought Daryl had gone to the shop hours ago. By noon, Brenda drove to Highway 27 herself. None of them knew what to do. Daryl had never missed work without calling. Brenda called his brother Travis. They drove the roads looking for the blue Silverado. Nothing. By evening, fear had set in. At 7 that night, Brenda filed a missing person report. The deputy was sympathetic, but not concerned. Adult men sometimes took off for a day or two, but Brenda knew better. "My husband doesn't run off," she said. "Something happened to him." Wednesday passed with no word. Thursday brought silence. Then Friday morning, April 19th, a hunter found a blue Chevy Silverado on an old logging road off County Road 52, 12 miles north of Somerville. Sheriff Wade drove out immediately. Daryl's truck sat half a mile in, pulled off to the side. Doors unlocked, keys in the ignition. Inside, everything looked undisturbed. Daryl's wallet sat on the passenger seat, cash still inside. A thermos of coffee rested in the cup holder, but Daryl was nowhere to be found. Sheriff Wade organized an immediate search. Volunteers arrived by the dozens, forming lines through the forest. Search dogs picked up Daryl's scent leading away from the truck, but lost the trail after 200 yards near a creek bed. For 5 days, volunteers covered miles of terrain. Helicopters flew overhead. Nothing. Daryl had simply vanished into the trees. By late April, with no evidence and no body, the search was scaled back. This missing person case remained open, but active leads had dried up. The question haunted everyone. Why had Daryl driven to that remote logging road? And what happened in those woods? In 1991, Sheriff Wade ran the investigation with limited resources. That meant minimal manpower, no advanced forensics, and techniques relying on interviews and legwork. But Wade was thorough. He knew this wasn't a case where Daryl had walked away. Wade interviewed everyone connected to Daryl. Brenda repeated her story consistently. Daryl seemed normal, mentioning an errand, but not specifying what. Seth at the shop confirmed Daryl had mentioned leaving early Tuesday. When pressed, Seth remembered something. About a week before Daryl disappeared, a man had come by asking for Daryl specifically. They'd spoken privately near the office, voices low. Seth couldn't recall the name, but remembered the man seemed tense. This detail caught Wade's attention. He asked Brenda if Daryl had mentioned any disputes. She remembered Daryl dealing with business stress. About 2 years earlier, Daryl had partnered with another mechanic named Cody to expand the shop. The partnership hadn't worked out. After 6 months, they'd dissolved it. Cody had moved on to a garage in Floyd County. As far as Brenda knew, there were no hard feelings. Wade tracked down Cody in Rome. Cody seemed surprised when deputies showed up. "Yeah, we used to work together," Cody said. "Haven't talked to him in over a year, though." "Why?" When Wade explained Daryl was missing, Cody's expression shifted. "That's terrible. Daryl's a good guy." Wade asked directly about problems when the partnership ended. Cody shrugged. "Nothing major. We had different ideas about how to run things. We realized it wasn't going to work, so we split. He bought out my share. No big drama." "When did you last see him?" "Like I said, over a year ago. Maybe longer." Wade made notes. Cody's alibi for the week Daryl disappeared would need verification. The partnership dissolution went into the file as something to explore further. Wade examined Daryl's financial records. The shop was doing well. No suspicious transactions, no evidence of gambling debts or drug problems. Interviews with friends and customers painted a consistent picture. Daryl was honest, not the type to get tangled in criminal activity. The logging road where Daryl's truck was found became a focal point. Wade canvassed the area. Had anyone seen the truck? Most residents didn't even know the logging road existed. One elderly woman mentioned hearing a vehicle early Tuesday morning, around dawn. But she hadn't seen anything. By May, the investigation had stalled. Daryl's truck had been processed. Fingerprints matched Daryl and a few unknowns. No signs of struggle, no blood. The keys left in the ignition suggested Daryl had planned to return quickly, or gotten out willingly to meet someone. Without a body, without witnesses, and without clear motive, the case couldn't move forward. Brenda organized search parties through the summer. Flyers covered 3 counties. Local news ran stories. A reward fund reached $5,000. Tips trickled in, each leading nowhere. By fall, the massive effort had faded. Daryl Hutchins became a story people told when discussing local mysteries. The mechanic who vanished. The unsolved mystery that haunted Chattahoochee County. The case went cold, and somewhere in Chattahoochee National Forest, Daryl's remains waited in silence. But who had lured him to his death? And why had they gotten away with it for so long? The months following Daryl's disappearance transformed Brenda from a quiet, small-town wife into a woman driven by one purpose: finding her husband. Every morning brought the same crushing weight. Every night, she reviewed the same questions. Where was Daryl? What happened on that logging road? Travis, Daryl's younger brother, became Brenda's closest ally. He'd always looked up to Daryl, who'd taught him to fix cars, to hunt, to navigate the woods. Travis took leave from his construction job and devoted himself to the search. He created maps, marking every road and trail within 20 miles of where Daryl's truck was found. On weekends, he'd pack supplies and disappear into the forest for days, searching systematically. Brenda became the public face of the search. She organized monthly vigils at the Chattahoochee County Courthouse. She spoke to news stations whenever they'd listen, keeping Daryl's story alive. She contacted every missing persons organization she could find. The community rallied around Brenda initially. Friends brought food. Church members organized search parties. But as summer turned to fall and fall to winter, support gradually faded. People had their own lives. Brenda's grief, her refusal to move on, became something people didn't know how to address. By 1992, a year after Daryl vanished, many had quietly concluded he was dead. But Brenda couldn't accept that without proof. She kept Hutchins Auto Repair running, hiring a manager to oversee the mechanics. The business was Daryl's legacy. Travis continued his searches, though less frequently as money ran tight. He'd spend weekends in the forest, following hunches, chasing rumors. In spring 1993, 2 years after Daryl disappeared, Brenda made a shocking decision. She sold the house she and Daryl had shared. The memories were too painful. She moved into a small apartment above a storefront in downtown Somerville and used the money to fund continued search efforts. She hired a private investigator named Warren to review the case. Warren uncovered a few details Sheriff Wade hadn't fully explored. Several people mentioned overhearing heated discussions between Daryl and Cody, though nobody recalled specifics. Warren tracked down Cody again in Tennessee. Cody maintained his story and had an alibi for the morning Daryl vanished, confirmed by time cards. Warren also looked into Daryl's customers. Had anyone held a grudge? Every lead dissolved into dead ends. By 1994, even Warren had to admit there was nowhere else to look. Brenda transformed her apartment into a command center. File boxes stacked against walls, maps pinned with red markers, photographs of Daryl covering every surface. To visitors, it looked like obsession. To Brenda, it was survival. Years accumulated. Travis eventually married and started a family, though guilt gnawed at him. He named his first son Darryl Travis. Life continued forward, whether anyone wanted it to or not. By 2000, nearly a decade after Darryl vanished, this cold case was definitively dormant. Sheriff Wade had retired. The new sheriff occasionally reviewed old files, but had no new insights. The missing person report remained technically open, but nobody was actively working it. Brenda never forgot. She kept vigils going, though attendance dwindled to just her, Travis, and a few loyal friends. She called the sheriff's department monthly. The answer was always the same. No, ma'am. Nothing new. On April 16, 2005, the 14th anniversary, Brenda sat alone, surrounded by documentation of her 14-year search. She was 53, half her life consumed by this mystery. She'd never remarried. How could she, when she was still married to a ghost? She wrote in her journal, 14 years today. I don't know how much longer I can do this, but I can't stop. If I stop searching, then Darryl really is gone. Somewhere in the darkness, in the vast forest north of Somerville, her husband's remains lay waiting. It would take another 10 years before the truth emerged. And when it did, the answer would be closer to home than anyone imagined. Detective Michael stood in the GBI Forensic Lab in Atlanta in late June 2015. Dr. Patricia Lynn, the state's chief forensic anthropologist, laid out her findings on the skeletal remains discovered near Blood Mountain. Male, approximately 25 to 35 years old at time of death, Dr. Lynn said. Height estimated between 5'9" and 6 feet. Time since death, based on decomposition patterns, 20 to 30 years. The timeline matched Darryl Hutchins' disappearance in 1991. Cause of death? Dr. Lynn indicated the skull. Blunt force trauma, a depressed fracture on the left parietal bone. The impact was severe, immediately fatal, or rendering the victim unconscious. Based on the fracture pattern, a heavy object, possibly a metal tool, a pipe, something with weight. This was deliberate. Michael studied the skull, imagining the violence. What about dental records? Dr. Lynn pulled out a comparison chart. Dental records for Darryl Hutchins were on file. I compared them to our remains. It's a positive match. 12 points of comparison, including a crown on the upper left molar. This is absolutely Darryl Hutchins. The confirmation hit Michael's hard. This man had a name, a family, a life stolen 24 years ago. Someone had killed him and walked free all this time. Can you extract DNA? Already done. We extracted DNA from the femur. Complete profile. It's in the system now. Dr. Lynn handed him a report. But there's something else. We found fabric fibers embedded in the skull fracture. Whoever hit him, the weapon was wrapped in cloth, possibly to muffle sound or prevent leaving tool marks that could be traced. Michaels examined the fiber evidence sealed in plastic. Faded blue threads, barely visible. Can you identify the fabric? Cotton blend, likely from a work shirt or rag. Common material. But if you find a suspect and can locate the weapon or clothing, we can potentially make a match. Over the following days, Michaels worked to notify Darryl's family. He called Brenda first. When he identified himself, she knew immediately why he was calling. You found him, she whispered. Yes, ma'am. Remains discovered in Chattahoochee National Forest have been positively identified as your husband through dental records and DNA analysis. Long silence. Then quietly, how did he die? Evidence indicates homicide. Blunt force trauma, it would have been quick. Another silence. Finally, do you know who did it? Not yet. But I'm going to find out. I promise you that. Brenda's voice hardened. Good. Find them. Michaels drove to Somerville the next day to meet with Brenda and Travis. They sat in a coffee shop on the town square, where Brenda had held vigils for years. She looked older than her 63 years, but her eyes held fierce clarity. "Tell me everything," she said. Michaels walked them through the discovery, the forensic analysis, the ongoing investigation. He explained he was reviewing the original 1991 case file and conducting new interviews with anyone connected to Daryl back then. Travis leaned forward. "You're going to look at Cody again, right? Something never sat right with me about how that partnership ended. I heard rumors they'd argued about finances before splitting up." Michaels made notes. The 1991 investigation had looked at Cody, but cleared him based on his alibi. Still, alibis could be fabricated. "Do you know where Cody is now?" "Runs his own garage over in Tryon, about 20 miles west. Been there for years." Brenda added. "He came to a vigil once, back in maybe 1993. Said he was sorry, hoped we'd find answers. Then, I never saw him again." Before leaving, Michaels asked about Daryl's belongings. Brenda handed him a key to a storage unit. "Take whatever you need. Just bring me answers." As Michaels drove back to Atlanta, he felt the weight of this cold case investigation settling onto his shoulders. This wasn't just about solving an unsolved mystery. It was about delivering justice to a woman who'd spent half her life searching for truth. But after 24 years, evidence was scarce, and memories faded. Finding the killer would require more than determination. Would require a breakthrough. What had really happened between Daryl and Cody? And could a dissolved business partnership have led to murder? Detective Michaels decided to dig deeper into the financial relationship between Daryl and Cody. Business disputes over money provided strong motives for violence. He requested business records from Hutchins Auto Repair going back to 1988. Brenda provided authorization. Within days, boxes of old ledgers, tax returns, and bank statements arrived. Hutchins Auto Repair had been profitable from the start. Daryl kept meticulous records. When Cody joined as partner in early 1989, the business expanded. They bought new equipment, hired additional help. Revenue doubled within 6 months. But problems started showing up in late 1989. Michaels found handwritten notes in Daryl's files, dated September through November. The notes referenced discrepancies and missing receipts. One note read, "Need to talk to Cody about cash jobs not recorded. 3rd time this month." Michaels leaned back. It appeared Cody had been taking cash payments and pocketing the money without recording it. If Daryl had discovered it, that would create serious tension. Further digging revealed a formal letter, dated December 15, 1989, from Daryl to Cody, outlining concerns regarding financial management and proposing to dissolve the partnership. He offered to buy out Cody's share for $15,000. Attached was Cody's signed response, dated December 28, agreeing to terms. A canceled check for $15,000, dated January 3, 1990, confirmed the transaction. On the surface, it looked clean. But Michaels noticed something. Based on the business's growth, Cody's 40% stake should have been worth significantly more than $15,000. If the partnership had continued, Cody would have earned tens of thousands in profit. By discovering the cash skimming and forcing dissolution, Daryl had cost Cody substantial future income. Was $15,000 enough to kill over? Maybe not alone. But resentment, wounded pride, and lost business position could fester for years, especially if Cody believed he'd been cheated, even though he'd been caught stealing. Michaels requested Cody's employment records from 1991. According to time cards, Cody had clocked in at the truck repair facility in Rome at 7 on the morning of April 16, 1991. The facility was 30 miles from the logging road where Daryl's truck was found. But something nagged at Michaels. The logging road was remote, accessible only by driving 12 miles north of Somerville on back roads. If someone wanted to lure Daryl there, they'd need a reason that made sense, a business proposition, an offer to sell something. Michaels reviewed the 1991 interviews again. Brenda's statement mentioned Daryl saying he was going to look at some equipment. She hadn't pressed for details, assuming it was shop-related. Equipment. Vague enough to mean anything. What if someone had contacted Daryl about equipment for sale, something worth driving out to see before work? And what if that someone was Cody, setting up a meeting under false pretenses? Michaels needed more evidence. He drove to the storage unit where Brenda kept Daryl's belongings. Inside were boxes of personal effects, clothing, boots, tools, papers. Michaels carefully bagged several items for forensic analysis. Modern DNA technology could detect traces of contact, even after decades. Among the papers, Michaels found Daryl's appointment book from 1991. He flipped to April. On Monday, April 15th, Daryl had written, "Call about tractor, CR 52. County Road 52. That was the road leading to the logging road where Daryl's truck was found. Someone had contacted Daryl about a tractor for sale, giving him a location to meet. In a box of miscellaneous items, he found an old answering machine tape. In 1991, people still used cassette-based machines. This tape had been saved. He bagged it as evidence. Back in Atlanta, the forensic audio specialist worked on the tape for 2 days. With digital enhancement, 3 messages became audible. The third message made Michaels sit up straight. A male voice, somewhat muffled. "Daryl, it's about that tractor we talked about. Meet me Tuesday morning, early. Take County Road 52 north about 12 miles, then turn onto the old logging road on the left. The tractor's back there. I'll be there around 6:30. Bring cash if you're serious." The voice quality was poor, distorted by age, but it was enough. Someone had deliberately lured Daryl to that isolated location. This cold case had just taken a major turn. The question now was whether the voice matched Cody. Detective Michaels needed a voice sample from Cody to compare with the answering machine tape. He had the interview recording from their conversation at the garage. He sent both audio files to the forensic specialist for voice comparison analysis. The results came back on a Thursday afternoon in late July. Dr. Raymond Park, the forensic audio specialist, called with findings that would reshape the investigation. "The voice on the answering machine tape shows significant phonetic similarities to your suspect's voice recording," Dr. Park explained. "I analyzed 17 distinct speech characteristics: vowel pronunciation, consonant articulation, pitch range, speaking rhythm. While tape quality prevents absolute certainty, I can say with reasonable confidence that the probability these are the same speaker exceeds 85%. Michaels felt adrenaline surge. 85% wasn't ironclad for court, but it was strong enough to justify aggressive investigation. "Can you prepare a formal report?" "Already done. Sending it now." With the voice analysis suggesting Cody had made that call luring Daryl to the logging road, Michaels needed additional evidence. He contacted the GBI crime lab about items collected from Daryl's storage unit. The forensic technician, Lisa Chen, had processed Daryl's work boots and several tools. "We found trace soil samples on the boots that match the geological composition where the remains were discovered," she reported. "That confirms Daryl was at that location. But more interesting is what we found on a wrench from his toolbox." "What did you find?" "Microscopic blood traces in the threading. We extracted DNA and got a partial profile. It's degraded, but we have enough markers to compare against known samples." "Is it Daryl's blood?" "No, it's someone else's. The profile is male, and it doesn't match your victim." Michaels processed this carefully. A wrench with someone else's blood. If that wrench had been the murder weapon, and if that blood belonged to the killer, they had physical evidence linking a suspect to the crime. "Can you compare it against Cody's DNA?" "If you can get me a sample, absolutely." Without probable cause for arrest, Michaels couldn't compel Cody to provide DNA. He'd have to obtain it through less direct means. Surveillance teams could collect discarded items, coffee cups, cigarette butts, anything Cody touched and abandoned in public. Michaels assigned 2 investigators to monitor Cody and Tryon. For 3 days, they watched him. On the 4th day, Cody stopped at a convenience store, bought a soda, and threw the empty bottle in a trash can. The moment he drove away, the team retrieved the bottle, sealed it in an evidence bag, and delivered it to the lab. DNA extraction took 48 hours. When Lisa Chen called with results, her voice carried unmistakable excitement. "It's a match. The blood on the wrench matches the DNA from Cody's soda bottle. 13 markers in common. This is definitive." Michaels exhaled slowly. 24 years after Daryl Hutchins vanished, they finally had forensic evidence linking Cody to the murder weapon. Combined with the voice analysis from the answering machine and the financial motive from the dissolved partnership, the case was coming together. But Michaels wanted more before making an arrest. He needed to understand exactly what had happened that morning in April 1991. He drove back to Somerville and met with Travis. Did Daryl keep a personal calendar or diary? Anything where he might have written about conversations or plans? Travis thought for a moment. Brenda might have his old calendar. He used to carry a pocket planner. 2 hours later, Michaels was carefully turning pages of a small leather-bound planner from 1991. In early April, one entry stood out. April 15th, Cody called about tractor for sale. Sounds like good deal. Check it out Tuesday a.m. There it was. Written evidence that Cody had contacted Daryl about the tractor, corroborating the answering machine message. Michael spent the next week preparing the case for the district attorney. He compiled forensic reports, witness statements, financial documents, and voice analysis. The circumstantial evidence, combined with the DNA match on the wrench, created a compelling narrative. On August 4, 2015, Michaels met with District Attorney Helen Morrison. He laid out the case methodically. Morrison listened intently. "This is solid work, Detective. After all these years, you've actually solved this cold case. The DNA on the murder weapon is particularly strong. But I want to make sure we're airtight before arresting him. What else do you need? Interview anyone who might have heard Cody talk about Daryl over the years. Ex-wives, friends, co-workers. Sometimes people say things when they think nobody's paying attention." Michaels nodded. They'd have one chance to arrest and prosecute Cody. If they moved too quickly and missed crucial evidence, the case could fall apart. Over the following 2 weeks, Michaels conducted interviews. Cody's ex-wife from a marriage that ended in 1997 remembered Cody being stressed about money in the early 90s, sometimes mentioning that Daryl had screwed him over. A former co-worker recalled Cody saying about Daryl's disappearance. He probably got what he deserved. Got what he deserved. That phrase echoed in Michaels's mind. It suggested knowledge, maybe even satisfaction about Daryl's fate. By late August, the evidence package was complete. Morrison reviewed it and made her decision. "We're ready. Get a warrant." The unsolved mystery that had haunted Chattahoochee County for 24 years was about to be solved. The morning of August 28, 2015, dawned clear and warm in Tryon, Georgia. At Mountain View Auto Repair, Cody was working on a brake job when 5 vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Detective Michael stepped out first, followed by 4 GBI investigators and 2 Chattahoochee County deputies. Cody looked up from the engine bay, wrench in hand, and immediately knew why they were there. His face went pale. He set down the wrench carefully and straightened up. "Cody," Michaels called out. "Georgia Bureau of Investigation. I need you to step away from the vehicle and put your hands where I can see them." Cody complied slowly, his jaw tight. "What's this about?" Michaels walked closer, holding the arrest warrant. "You're under arrest for the murder of Daryl Hutchins. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Michaels read the Miranda rights, another investigator placed handcuffs on Cody's wrists. Cody didn't resist, but his eyes blazed with anger and fear. "I didn't kill anybody," Cody said. "We can discuss that at the station." They transported Cody to the Chattahoochee County Sheriff's Department. Michaels wanted to give Cody a chance to tell his side, though he knew most attorneys would advise against talking. Sometimes suspects needed to explain themselves, and in that need to be understood, they confessed. Cody sat in the interview room for 30 minutes before Michaels entered with a folder containing the case evidence. A video camera in the corner recorded everything. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" Michaels asked. Cody stared at the table. "I want a lawyer." Michaels nodded. "Okay. We'll arrange for a public defender to contact you." As Cody was led to a holding cell, Michaels called Brenda with the news. Her reaction was quiet, almost disbelief. "You arrested him? After all this time?" "Yes, ma'am. Cody's in custody. We have strong evidence connecting him to Daryl's murder. The district attorney believes we can get a conviction." Brenda's voice broke. "Thank you for not giving up on my husband." Word of the arrest spread through Somerville within hours. The local newspaper ran a headline: "Arrest made in 1991, cold case murder of local businessman." Television crews arrived, setting up cameras outside the courthouse. Reporters interviewed residents who remembered Daryl and the search efforts from decades ago. Travis drove to the sheriff's department and found Michaels. "Is it really over?" he asked, eyes red. "The investigation's over. Now comes the prosecution. But yes, we got him." Travis sat heavily. 24 years. I've spent 24 years wondering who killed my brother. And it was Cody the whole time. Someone we knew. How did he live with himself? "Some people compartmentalize," Michaels said. "They bury the guilt so deep they almost forget. Others justify it, convince themselves the victim deserved it." Over the following days, details of the evidence against Cody began emerging in court filings. The public learned about the DNA match on the wrench, the voice analysis from the answering machine tape, and the financial motive. Each revelation added weight to the case. Cody's court-appointed attorney, Thomas Garrett, reviewed the evidence and had a difficult conversation with his client. The DNA evidence was damning. The voice analysis was strong. The timeline and motive created a compelling narrative. Fighting this case at trial would be an uphill battle. Meanwhile, Michaels continued investigating, searching for additional evidence that might seal the case completely. He wanted confession. He wanted to know exactly what happened that morning on the logging road. But would Cody ever tell the truth about what he'd done? 3 weeks after his arrest, Cody sat in his jail cell in the Chattahoochee County Detention Facility, staring at concrete walls. His attorney, Thomas Garrett, had laid out the situation bluntly. The evidence against him was overwhelming. DNA matching his blood on what was likely the murder weapon. Voice analysis connecting him to the call, luring Daryl to the logging road. Financial motive from the dissolved partnership. Witness statements about his resentment toward Daryl. "If we go to trial, you're looking at life without parole," Garrett told him. "The DA might be willing to negotiate if you cooperate. Life with possibility of parole after 30 years, instead of never getting out. But that requires you telling them what happened." Cody closed his eyes. For 24 years, he'd lived with what he'd done. In the beginning, guilt had eaten at him constantly. He'd jump at sirens, avoid Somerville, struggled to sleep. But over time, the memory had dulled. He'd convinced himself it was justified. Daryl had stolen his future, destroyed their partnership over some cash jobs that barely mattered. Daryl had humiliated him, forced him out of a business that should have made them both successful. But now, facing decades in prison, the justifications felt hollow. He was 56 years old. If he didn't cooperate, he'd die behind bars. On September 18, 2015, Cody's attorney contacted District Attorney Morrison with a proposal. Cody was willing to confess to killing Daryl Hutchins in exchange for a sentence of life, with possibility of parole after 30 years. He'd provide full details of what happened that morning in April 1991. Morrison consulted with Detective Michaels and the victim's family. Brenda and Travis struggled with the decision. Part of them wanted Cody to face trial, to hear every piece of evidence laid out publicly. But another part just wanted the truth, wanted to finally know what had happened to Daryl in those woods. "If he confesses, we'll know everything," Travis said quietly. "After 24 years of questions, we'll finally have answers." Morrison accepted the deal. On September 22, 2015, Cody sat in an interview room with his attorney, Detective Michaels, and a prosecutor. A video camera recorded everything as Cody, for the first time, told the truth about what he'd done. "I called Daryl on April 15th, Cody began, his voice flat. "Told him I had a tractor for sale, asked if he wanted to look at it. I knew he'd been looking for a tractor for his property. I gave him directions to that old logging road off County Road 52. Told him to meet me there early Tuesday morning before work." "Why did you want to meet him?" Michaels asked. Cody's jaw tightened. "Because I was angry. I'd been angry for over a year. Daryl had forced me out of the partnership, bought me out for way less than my share was worth. I'd been working in Rome making barely anything while Hutchins Auto Repair kept growing. That should have been my business too. That success should have been mine. So you lured him to the logging road. Then what? I got there around 6, parked my truck back in the trees where it couldn't be seen from the road, waited. Daryl showed up around 6:30, just like I knew he would, always punctual. He parked and got out, looking around for the tractor." Cody paused, his hands trembling slightly. "I walked up to him with a tire iron. I'd wrapped it in an old shirt so it wouldn't leave marks. Daryl saw me and smiled, said, 'Hey Cody, didn't know you were selling the tractor.' He wasn't suspicious at all. Trusted me." "What happened next?" "I told him the tractor was further back in the woods. He started walking that way. I followed. When we were far enough from the road that nobody would hear, I hit him. One swing to the back of the head. He went down immediately. Didn't even make a sound." The room was silent. Michaels kept his voice steady. "Was he dead?" "I think so. I checked for a pulse but couldn't find one. I panicked. I dragged his body deeper into the woods, found that ravine near the creek, pushed him down between the rocks, and covered him with leaves and branches. Then I walked back to his truck." "Why did you leave the truck on the logging road?" "I thought it would look like he'd met someone there, maybe had an argument or an accident. I wiped down anything I might have touched, then walked back through the woods to where I'd parked my own truck. Drove straight to work in Rome, clocked in at 7, just like normal. Nobody ever suspected." Michaels leaned forward. "What did you do with the tire iron?" "Threw it in the Coosa River a few days later, weighted it with rocks. It's long gone." "The wrench we found in Daryl's toolbox had your blood on it. How did that happen?" Cody looked confused for a moment, then understanding crossed his face. "Must have been from months earlier when we were still partners. I cut my hand on something in the shop, bled all over. Daryl probably used that wrench to fix something that day. I never thought about it." The confession continued for another hour. Cody answered every question, filled in every detail. When it was over, he signed the transcript and slumped back in his chair, looking somehow both relieved and defeated. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I've wanted to say that for 24 years. I'm sorry." Michaels gathered the documents. Sorry didn't bring Daryl back. Sorry didn't give Brenda and Travis back the decades they'd lost. But at least now, this unsolved mystery had finally been solved. Justice was coming. Late, but coming. On November 9, 2015, Cody stood before Judge Patricia Reynolds in Chattahoochee County Superior Court. The courtroom was packed. Brenda sat in the front row with Travis and their family, faces tight with emotion they'd held for 24 years. District Attorney Morrison presented the plea agreement. Cody would plead guilty to murder and receive a sentence of life in prison with possibility of parole after 30 years. He'd waived his right to trial and provided a full confession detailing how he'd killed Darrell Hutchins on April 16, 1991. Judge Reynolds looked at Cody sternly. "Do you understand that by accepting this plea, you're admitting to the murder of Darrell Hutchins?" "Yes, Your Honor," Cody said. "And you understand you'll spend a minimum of 30 years in prison and possibly the rest of your life?" "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Reynolds then asked the required questions. Was Cody entering this plea voluntarily? Had anyone threatened or coerced him? Did he understand his rights? Cody answered yes to everything. "Very well. The court accepts your guilty plea." Judge Reynolds shuffled papers. "Before I impose sentence, does the victim's family wish to make a statement?" Brenda stood slowly. She'd prepared remarks, written them out, and practiced them dozens of times. But now, standing in the courtroom, looking at the man who'd killed her husband, the prepared words felt inadequate. "You took everything from me," she said, her voice trembling but strong. "You took my husband, my future, 24 years of my life spent searching for answers you could have provided at any time. You watched me suffer. You watched our community tear itself apart, looking for Darrell. And you said nothing." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "I've imagined this moment for so long. I thought I'd feel relief or closure or something. But all I feel is empty. Darrell is still gone. Those 24 years are still gone. Nothing you do now can give them back." Travis stood next. "My brother was a good man. He gave you a chance when you needed work. He trusted you. And you repaid that by killing him over money, over wounded pride. You're pathetic. And I hope every single day you spend in prison, you think about what you took from this family." Judge Reynolds allowed several other family members and friends to speak. Each statement added weight to the decades of pain Cody's actions had caused. When they finished, Judge Reynolds addressed Cody directly. "I've presided over many cases in my career. Few have affected me like this one. The cold-blooded nature of this crime, the premeditation involved in luring Mr. Hutchins to that remote location, the 24 years you allowed his family to suffer while you lived your life, all of it speaks to a profound moral failing." She paused. "The plea agreement binds me to a specific sentence. But understand this. If I had discretion, I would impose something far harsher. As it stands, I sentence you to life in prison with possibility of parole after 30 years. May you spend every day of that sentence reflecting on what you've done." The gavel came down. Bailiffs led Cody from the courtroom. He glanced back once at Brenda, but she'd already turned away, unable to look at him anymore. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the family. Travis made a brief statement. "Today marks the end of a 24-year nightmare. Our family can finally lay Darrell to rest, knowing that justice has been served. We want to thank Detective Michaels and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation for never giving up on this cold case, for using modern technology and old-fashioned determination to finally bring Darrell's killer to justice." Detective Michaels stood off to the side, watching. He'd attended sentencing for every case he'd solved, but this one felt different. The dedication Brenda and Travis had shown, the decades they'd refused to give up, had been extraordinary. He was grateful he'd been able to give them answers. That evening, Brenda and Travis drove to the cemetery where Darrell would finally be laid to rest. The skeletal remains, released by the GBI after the trial concluded, would be buried beside Brenda's parents in a small cemetery outside Somerville. The funeral was scheduled for November 14, 2015, a gray autumn day with leaves falling from the trees. The service was simple. A local pastor spoke about Darrell's life, his kindness, his work ethic, the love he'd shared with his family. Nearly 100 people attended, many who'd participated in the searches decades ago. As Daryl's casket was lowered into the ground, Brenda placed a single red rose on top. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I never stopped looking. I never forgot." Travis stood beside her, arm around her shoulders. They'd spent half their lives searching for this moment, dreading it, needing it. Now that it had arrived, the grief was overwhelming but somehow lighter. They finally knew the truth. Daryl could finally rest. And maybe, after 24 years, so could they. In the weeks following Daryl's funeral, Brenda began the difficult process of rebuilding a life she'd put on hold for nearly a quarter century. The apartment that had served as her command center for years was slowly transformed back into a living space. File boxes went into storage. Maps came down from walls. Photographs of Daryl were carefully placed in albums rather than covering every surface. Travis visited often, helping her sort through the accumulated materials from decades of investigation. They found old tip sheets, search grid maps, reward fund documentation. Each item represented hours of work, days of hope and despair. "We should donate this to the GBI," Travis suggested. "Maybe it'll help train investigators on cold cases." Detective Michaels accepted the donation gratefully. The case file on Daryl Hutchins, now complete from disappearance through conviction, would become a teaching tool for how modern forensic technology could solve seemingly impossible mysteries decades after the fact. Brenda also made a decision about Hutchins Auto Repair. The business had continued operating under hired managers for 24 years, remaining profitable through Daryl's reputation for honest work. Now, Brenda sold it to the longtime manager who'd kept it running. The sale brought a significant sum, money Brenda used to establish the Daryl Hutchins Memorial Scholarship at North Georgia Technical College, providing funding for students studying automotive technology. Daryl loved teaching people about mechanics, Brenda told Travis at the scholarship announcement. This way, part of him continues helping people learn the trade he loved. Travis, who'd named his son after Daryl, brought the boy to visit Brenda regularly. Young Daryl was now 13, old enough to understand the story of his namesake. Travis told him about his uncle, about the years of searching, about never giving up hope even when everything seemed hopeless. "Your uncle was a good man," Travis told his son. "He worked hard, treated people fairly, and built something meaningful. That's the legacy we want you to carry forward." The community of Somerville, which had lived with this unsolved mystery for so long, also began to heal. The arrest and conviction brought closure not just to Daryl's family, but to everyone who'd participated in the searches, who'd wondered for years what had happened to the friendly mechanic who'd fixed their cars and treated them honestly. At Hutchins Auto Repair's final day under the old name, before the new owner renamed it, dozens of former customers stopped by to share memories. Stories of Daryl staying late to finish a repair before someone's wedding. Daryl fixing a single mother's car for the cost of parts. Daryl teaching neighborhood kids about engines in his spare time. "He was one of the good ones," an elderly farmer told Brenda. "This county lost something important when he died. But at least now we know the truth." Brenda found herself able to think about Daryl without the crushing weight of unanswered questions. The grief remained, would always remain, but it was different now. Clean somehow. She could remember their life together, without every memory being tainted by the mystery of his disappearance. She started volunteering with a missing persons advocacy group, helping other families navigate the nightmare she'd lived through. Her experience, her refusal to give up, became a source of hope for others facing similar situations. "I spent 24 years searching," she told one woman whose husband had disappeared. "I know how impossible it seems. But cases do get solved. Families do get answers. Don't give up." By spring 2016, Brenda had found a kind of peace she'd thought impossible. She still visited Daryl's grave weekly, bringing flowers and talking to him about the scholarship, about young Daryl, about the life continuing around them. "We did it," she whispered to the headstone. "We found who did it. You can rest now. We can all rest now." And for the first time in 24 years, she truly believed that. 3 years after Cody's conviction, in the fall of 2018, Detective James Michaels retired from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. At his retirement party, colleagues presented him with a plaque listing his most significant cases. At the top of that list was Darrell Hutchins, 1991, cold case, solved 2015. Michaels kept the plaque in his home office, where he could see it daily. The Hutchins case had been one of the most challenging and rewarding investigations of his career, not because of its complexity, though the forensic work had been meticulous, but because of the family's dedication. Brenda and Travis had shown him what real determination looked like, what refusing to give up truly meant. He stayed in touch with them over the years, checking in occasionally. Brenda had fully transitioned into advocacy work, serving on the board of a national missing persons organization. Travis had started a nonprofit that helped families fund private investigators when police resources were limited. Young Darrell had begun expressing interest in law enforcement, inspired by the story of how his uncle's case was finally solved. Cody remained in Georgia State Prison, serving his life sentence. In 2019, he gave an interview to a true crime podcast, speaking publicly for the first time about his crime beyond his confession. He talked about the resentment that had festered, how small grievances had grown into murderous rage, how he'd convinced himself Darrell deserved what happened. "I was wrong," Cody said in the interview. "I destroyed lives over money and pride. I can't undo it. I can't bring Darrell back. I can't give those years back to his family. All I can do is tell the truth and hope that somehow it helps someone else not make the same mistake." The interview generated significant media attention. Crime shows featured the Hutchins case as an example of how modern DNA technology and genetic genealogy were revolutionizing cold case investigations. The story was told and retold, each version emphasizing different aspects. The devoted wife who never stopped searching, the advanced forensics that cracked a decades-old mystery, the killer who'd hidden in plain sight for 24 years. For the law enforcement community, the Hutchins case became a teaching example used in training programs across the country. It demonstrated that evidence preserved properly could yield results decades later with advancing technology. It showed that witness statements, even from long ago, could become crucial when re-examined with fresh perspective. Most importantly, it proved that cold cases weren't necessarily unsolvable, just waiting for the right combination of technology, determination, and timing. In Chattahoochee County, the case left a lasting impact. The Sheriff's Department upgraded its evidence storage facilities and implemented new protocols for preserving materials from unsolved cases. They established a dedicated cold case unit, small but focused, specifically to revisit old files with modern techniques. By 2020, that unit had reopened 3 cases from the 80s and 90s. While none had been solved yet, the families of victims felt renewed hope, knowing someone was still looking, still trying. For Brenda, now in her late 60s, life had taken on a different quality. She'd remarried in 2017, finding companionship with a retired teacher who understood her past and didn't expect her to forget Darrell. They traveled together, something Brenda had never done during those decades spent searching. She visited national parks, walked trails, saw mountains, and oceans she'd only dreamed about when every spare moment was consumed by the investigation. But she always returned to Somerville, to Darrell's grave, to the community that had supported her through the darkest years. And she continued her advocacy work, determined that other families facing similar nightmares would have resources and support she'd had to create on her own. Travis, now in his 50s, had become a successful construction contractor. His son, young Darrell, graduated high school in 2020 and enrolled in the criminal justice program at the University of North Georgia. The boy who'd been named after a murdered uncle he'd never met was determined to help solve mysteries like the one that had shaped his family's history. Uncle Daryl's story taught me that justice delayed isn't always justice denied, young Daryl told his father. Sometimes it just takes time, technology, and people who refuse to give up. As of 2025, Cody has served 10 years of his life sentence. He'll be eligible for parole consideration in 2045 at age 86. Given the nature of his crime and his victim's family's opposition, parole seems unlikely. He'll most probably die in prison, paying for those few minutes of violence in April 1991 with the rest of his life. The wrench that had carried the crucial DNA evidence is now stored in the GBI's forensic training facility, used to teach new investigators about evidence preservation and analysis. Daryl's case file sits in archives, a testament to what persistence and modern science can achieve. And in a small cemetery outside Somerville, beneath Georgia pines that whisper in the wind, Daryl Hutchins rests in peace. His grave marker bears his name, his dates, and a simple inscription chosen by Brenda. Gone but never forgotten. Justice finally served. The cold case that haunted Chattahoochee County for 24 years had reached its conclusion. The missing person case that seemed unsolvable had been cracked. The man who vanished into the woods in 1991 had finally come home. And his family, after decades of searching, finally had their answers. This unsolved mystery, this devastating cold case, had at last been solved.